Welcome to the tutorial for the Bracklesham Bay Dress. We're going to start with the darts. So this is our front panel. We've got a pair of these. There's a notch and a notch, very important to mark. This is our dart, which it really helps actually if you use a coloured felt tip to mark all your sizes before you cut out your pattern, and especially for the dart, because you can just see exactly very clearly where your size is. So I've put a pin in the point there, the end of the dart. I'm going to unpin the rest of my pattern here, and as I pull it through, look, that pin comes through with it, so I know that's pinned the fabric at the exact point of my dart. So I'm going to transfer that marking onto both sides. There we go. Now again, if you're a beginner or inexperienced, you can grab a ruler and chalk or a graphite pencil and just draw from that point to the notches to get your dart lines, if you're not too confident about doing it freehand. So here we go. Let me just tell you a little bit about this fabric before I move on. This is beautiful Minerva exclusive fabric. It's a linen viscose blend and it's perfect for this. It's called Enchanted Vision and it was gifted to me for the purpose of doing this tutorial. So I just want you to glory in it while we're sewing because it is really beautiful. Right, so we're pinning our dart. I've pinned the point and I've pinned the broad end, and I'm now just going to pop a pin in the middle. I'm going to start at the broader end and taper off towards that point. So back tack to start and working towards the pointed end of our dart, and we just taper off the fabric as we go. I never bother tying off my threads or anything at the end there, because if you've tapered off nicely it shouldn't come undone or anything. There we go. That's one dart. We're going to press this dart down. So I've pressed it down towards the waistline. Disappears beautifully into that fabric, doesn't it? That's done. So next job is the shoulder seams. This is my back panel. You can see it's cut to the fold. Let's open it up to show the right side. All that glorious colour. And we're going to lay on top here the shoulders of our front panels that we've just put the darts into. So I'm just matching up the raw edges, pop a pin in on each side. Again, if you're a beginner, don't be afraid to use more pins or tack. And we're going to stitch across using our centimetre seam allowance, which is usual on my patterns unless otherwise stated. There we go, centimetre sewn, and I'm going to overlock, or you could zigzag, or however you choose to finish your seams on that top. We're going to do it together, and then I'm going to press that seam towards the back panel. So there we go, that's our shoulders neatly stitched and the seam allowance is pressed towards your back. So next we're going to prepare the facing. We've got this long piece which is for the fronts, and this is the back neck facing. I've interfaced all these pieces, and I did that by block cutting, which is where you interface the fabric before you cut them out. This is the best way because it's most accurate. It stops it sort of warping or stretching. And I've used a very soft interfacing here because I didn't want to lose the beautiful soft quality of this fabric. I just don't want it to stretch or distort. So pinning the edges of my facings here, that's my back neck on top, right sides together, pinning it to my front facings, and I'm going to stitch again a centimetre seam allowance across those edges. There we go. And then we're just going to open this up and give it a press. Okay, there we go, nicely pressed. And I'm going to use my overlocker to finish off this raw edge. There we go, nice overlocked edge to neaten it off. Okay, so now we're ready to attach that facing. Incidentally, on the image you saw at the beginning, I had bound this edge because I know some people don't like facings, so that's another option for you here. Now I'm marking the centre back neck here with a little snip. You could use a graphite pencil again or some chalk, but I like to just use little snips. And I'm going to do the same on my dress at the back neck, just matching those seams and folding it in half so that I know exactly where the middle is. There we go. So we're going to open that up. And start pinning from that little mark that we've done from the centre back. Then you're going to pin the shoulder seam, matching those seams together. There we go, and then we're going to match the fronts. Now, because we've block cut this facing, we know that is exactly right. So if your front has stretched at all, you'll find out now. So pin the bottoms together and then work your way up. Remember, we've got that little notch in the middle, so match that, and then there you can see it fits perfectly. And again, on the other side, we're matching the ends first, working our way up, and then we're going to find that notch and pin all the way so that we know that's accurate. Great. Starting from one end, back tack, stitch all the way along, around the back of the neck, all the way down the other side, and back tack to finish. Here we go. Centimetre seam allowance again as usual, starting with the back tack, and we're just going to whiz all the way around this neckline. There we go. All stitched together. And I am just going to pop some little snips into that curve. I'm going to trim down my seam allowances first, just to get rid of the little bulky bit. This fabric's so thin it's not very bulky. Oops, I just caught that one in there. Let's snip these away, and then I'll do a little cheat and just snip that over so that's flat. And then I'm just going to snip up to the seam allowance, up to that stitch line. Careful not to cut in, but I'm only doing it around the curve. The rest of it's straight, so it doesn't need it. I'm going to keep this seam allowance pointing down, and then I'm going to fold my facing over it, and I'm going to stitch really close to where that seam is so that I'm stitching that seam allowance to my facing. I haven't trimmed or graded down my facing because it's such a fine fabric. I don't think it needs it, and again my interfacing was just super light. If you were doing it in a heavier fabric, then you would want to trim down your facing. So there we go, that's all understitched really nicely. This will make such a difference to your neckline. It just makes it lie so much more flat and crisp. I'm going to give that a press. There we go, really beautiful edge now. So next job is to pin the facing down. This will stop it ruckling up when you're wearing it or taking it on or off. And I'm just going to stitch very close to my overlocked edge all the way around. There we go, that's all stitched nicely. You could get all fancy with your top stitching on this if you had a plain fabric. Just needs a press now. Okay, so the next bit I'm going to do is just secure these fronts. There's my centre front notch at the bottom at the waist, and there's one on this one as well. I need to match those because that is my centre, so those need to lay on top of each other. And I'm just going to pin these raw edges together so that they're aligned, and I'm going to do a stay stitch. So It's just a slightly larger stitch than I would construct my garment in. I tend to use like a 4 or something like that, and literally just stitching those layers together so that they are treated as one piece when we come to put the skirt on. It also makes the next part a little bit easier if those are already aligned and secured. So there you go, you can see that's stitched together within the seam allowance. And at the moment those two fronts are still open. I'm going to choose to lie these flat against each other, making sure there's no ruckles or puckers, and I'm going to pin them together and then I'm going to stitch them down. This way you don't have any accidents of anything showing that you don't want showing. But you don't have to do it if you don't want to, that's absolutely fine. And I'm going to choose to stitch mine right on the edge here, look, from the top all the way down. You could stitch it on the line we've stitched already to secure your facing down, it's up to you again. Traditionally it's right over left for the wrap for a lady, but again, it's your dress, you choose. So there we go, we've secured that down. So that is now like one piece, which is much easier when it comes to sewing the skirt on. So next on the list is to sew up a side seam, but it's just the one that we're going to do at the moment. You'll see I've pre-overlocked my side seams and I'm just going to lay them right sides together. Doesn't matter which side, incidentally, just one side. And I'm going to pin these, matching my edges. There we go. So starting from under the arm, back tack, stitch a centimetre seam allowance around the curve and down to the waist. And we go back tack to secure the seam. There's our side seam. Open it up and give it a press. There we go, one side seam. Let's have a look at it from the right side. Gosh, these colours are lush. Okay, so yeah, we've got one side sewn and one side open. So now we're going to do one side of the skirt. We're going to seam it. Here's our pattern piece. You'll see the back and the front skirt are the same and they're both cut on the fold. There's one notch there on the hip. I've pre-overlocked my side seams again. Now if you wanted to put pockets into the seam here, there's a tutorial online on my account that shows you how to do that, and there's a downloadable piece from my website should you want a pocket pattern. I've marked with a little snip my centre front and my centre back, and I'm going to start pinning from the waist down towards the hem. Check that notch. Matching up those raw edges, sorry, overlocked edges, and start from the top, back tack, centimetre seam allowance again, all the way down to the hem, and then back tack again to finish. Nice easy seam. And then we're going to press that open again. So there we go, one side seam on the skirt. Next up is attaching the bodice and skirt together at the waist. So we've got this seam, we've got our centre front and our centre back marked on our skirt. So let's start by joining those side seams. Again, your front and back skirt are the same, so it doesn't matter which side seams you've done on each, because they're the same. And we're going to match that seam, side seam of the bodice to the side seam of the skirt and pop a pin in to start with. And then I've got the back bodice here. Let's find that. See, naughty me, I haven't marked the centre back, so I will do that quickly now. That's where it is there. Pin those together. pinning at the side, a couple of pins in between, matching the raw edges as we go. So again, match that centre front to that centre front and the side seams, a couple more pins, and then we're going to stitch from one end all the way to the other end using our centimetre seam allowance and back tacking each end to secure the seam. Right, let's check there's no tucks or puckers or anything in there. That looks all nice and flat and beautiful. Great. Okay, so let's attach this elastic channel. You'll have this pattern piece, it's cut on the fold, and again you've got all your different sizes marked here, so be careful that you use the correct length. I'm going to do a little bit of prep by just turning up that seam allowance, and I'm going to do a meagre 1 centimetre. You do have to be a little bit careful because if you take more than a centimetre here and more than a centimetre on the other side, you may end up a little bit tight on the casing for the elastic. I'm using a 3.5 centimetre elastic, so I need to make sure my seam allowances are pretty accurate for this. Okay, so I'm going to now pin this channel to the skirt side of my waistline on my dress. So I've got the right side of my elastic channel or casing, and I'm pinning that to the skirt side of this seam where I joined the bodice and the skirt to the waist. So work your way along carefully. It's important that you pin it to the skirt side because it needs to fold up onto the bodice, not the other way around. You'll get into all sorts of trouble. Here we go. Okay, so we're pinned on. Now I'm going to stitch along this stitch line that I just did. So it's the stitch line that holds the bodice and the skirt together. I'm just going over the same seam line again all the way along. So again, take your time, make sure you're not taking more than a centimetre. Okay, so that's our channel attached to the skirt side now. Let's take out any pins that are left. So the next job is to press this channel up towards the bodice and all that seam allowance. It should be inside your channel. There we go. So now all we need to do is, again, pin it carefully. Do tack if you're not so experienced. It will help just to keep it all nice and flat. And we're going to stitch right on the edge there all the way along. So here we go. Like I say, do take a bit of time and try not to take too much out of your channel with your seam line. Incidentally, you can use thinner elastic and just make more than one channel. Here we go. Let's take those pins out. So next we're going to insert the elastic. I've got my 3.5 centimetre elastic here and a good old safety pin. Incidentally, I have this elastic available to buy in my shop should you need some, along with various interfacings and other notions. And I'm just going to thread it through using my big old nappy pin. Again, being careful not to twist it, and also being careful that you don't lose the other end in your casing. So a little bit at a time is the best option here. When you get to the wrap over bit, make sure that you're the casing side of it and you don't get lost in your wrap over. Just going to secure that end as we're a bit close to losing it down there. Right, I've reached the end, securing with the safety pin so that we don't lose it. Give it a little bit of a stretch out to even out the gathering a little bit. Now we're going to carefully get that elastic so that it's at the side seam. Here we go. Pin in so we don't lose it, and again just kind of manipulate this to even out your gathers a little bit. So I'm going to stitch this and back tack over it both ends so that the elastic doesn't go anywhere. It's within the seam allowance just to secure it. That's a great job. I've done the other side too. Let's just make sure this is still flat. And then I'm just going to do a zigzag stitch over the edges again just to neaten them where the elastic raw edge was. Okay, so we're going to do this final side seam. So the important bit is to match up our casings. So we'll start with that, pin either side, try and flatten out the fabric as much as possible so that you keep the fullness in the dress, not in the seam. That's pinned either side, and then armhole and a few down from the waist to the hem. Lovely. So we're going to start at the armhole, back tack, centimetre seam allowance all the way down to the hem. Great, job done. Then we just need to open this up and give it a press. And let's have a look at it from the right side. Incidentally, if you don't want to add any sleeves to it at this point, you can do a tiny turn and turn hem on the armholes, and that's the top of your dress done. Now we're going to look at the sleeves. Here we go. This is your Bracklesham Bay sleeve. Remember, you need to cut one pair. You've got notches here that are important. You're going to gather in between those notches. And you've also got a large turn up here that you need to make note of. So let's start with one sleeve. And I'm going to start by turning up that meagre centimetre seam allowance again and giving it a press. There you go. That's all pressed up. And then I'm going to press up the seam allowance, and you'll know, you can see the seam allowance is sort of mirrored the shape of the sleeve there at the hem. Okay, so we're pinning this up and we're going to stitch right on the edge again, and I'm also going to stitch right on the hem too. So careful as you go. Again, if you need to tack, that's fine. Stitch as close to the edge as you can on both sides. There we go. So that's our elastic channel for our cuff. Just needs a quick press. Fabulous. And then I'm going to put some gathering threads in. So again, between those two notches, you've got the double one and the single one. The double one's the back of your sleeve, the single one's the front. So I'm going to start at one end, at one of those notches, and I'm using my centimetre seam allowance just to put in a big stitch a gathering thread. So I usually use a 5 length stitch for that. And then I'm doing another row halfway between the one I've just stitched and the raw edge. Okay, so there's our gathering threads ready to go. Next is the elastic in the cuff. Here's my 3.5 centimetre elastic again and my big nappy pin, and I'm just going to thread it through. Again, just be super careful you don't pull it all the way through. We've all done it. There's always a first time, and hopefully not a second. There we go. Just pin that in place so it doesn't disappear. Oh, if I use the right end of the pin and pull it through. For the elastic measurement, I used bicep measurement plus 2 centimetres. The sleeve does pretty much come just above your elbow, so you know, that might be a more appropriate measurement for you, depending what your arms are like. I'm going to stay stitch that elastic so it doesn't disappear. Lovely. Then right sides together, matching the bottoms of your cuffs. There we go. We're going to pin those together and give it a little stitch. So from the cuff up towards the armhole, centimetre seam allowance, back tack, and then overlock together or zigzag. Snip off some of that, and I'm going to just tuck that up into the seam, and then I'm just going to fold it over to one side and secure it with a stitch so that it doesn't rub. Keeps it all nice and flat. And there we go. Trim away the little stragglers. That's it. And then I'm going to push the seam allowance to one side and give it a press. There we go, one sleeve. So now we're going to insert the sleeves into the armholes. Here's my bodice, here's my sleeve, and I'm looking for my double notch, which is that side, so that is the back of my sleeve. So I need that to go in this armhole. I'm going to match the underarm seams first. There is a long sleeve pattern for this dress too, included in your package. It's a normal sleeve insertion, so it's just exactly the same as this but without the gathering. So this was the more tricky one to show in the tutorial. So you just want to match your notches and your underarm seam. We've got a single notch there, which is exactly the same for the other sleeve too. And then we're going to go from the inside now and find our gathering threads. There we go. Those ones are the ones that are ready to be pulled. So always pull up the bobbin thread, and then we want to find that notch. There we go. The top notch goes to the shoulder seam there. Again, exactly the same on the other sleeve version, but this one we need to pull up these gather threads until the sleeve is the same length as the armhole. On your straight long sleeve, it will all be the same length anyway, so you won't need any gather threads. Okay, so that looks like it's the same length that side. So we're just going to play with these gathers a little bit to even them out, pop a pin in and do the same on the other side. Okay, so if you're a newbie, it's always a good idea to do some tacking or put lots of pins in and just take your time, making sure your raw edges are together as you stitch this armhole. I always stitch from the inside, centimetre seam allowance, back tack to start, keep those raw edges together, and I will endeavour to stitch over my gather threads as I go. There we go, always worth taking a little bit of time. Holding those gathers flat as you go so you don't get any puckers. There we go, so let's take out any pins that we've got left. And I'm going to just check that's okay from the outside, that nothing's tucked up. No, that's great. So then I'll just finish this raw edge off with some overlocking. There we are. Always looks so neat, doesn't it? And lovely when it's finished off like that. Snip off any threads that are showing. Great, one sleeve. So, last but not least, the hem. Just a quick show of this sleeve. I gave that a little steam just to settle the gathers a little bit. I've overlocked my hem and I'm going to just turn mine and stitch it, but you could do a nice turn and turn, which always looks really nice. But for speed, I'm going to just turn it up a centimetre and stitch it down. So just do that all the way around. Again, if you want to do a turn and turn and you're a newbie, you can tack it or just put lots of pins in, whatever helps you. So there we go, that's nice and quick, just needs a press. So this is what we've got now. We've got a dress, we've got our facing, our crossover that's been stitched down, our beautiful cuffed sleeves, our elasticated waist and our hem. So I hope very much that yours looks something like this. Enjoy.